started, we say welcome, welcome, everybody. We're really happy that you are here. So we're going to start from the top. And I will tell you that my name's Christy Crawford. I'm the Director of Culturally Responsive and Sustaining Education and Equity Initiatives at New York City's CS4All team. So here, as you can see, is an amazing team of educators. So with these folks, you can learn about CS4All's equity work, their study and their efforts to change CS policies and practices. And you can also get answers to questions about real equity work, things that you might have been afraid to ask. You can ask these folks because they have been through it all. So you know what? If we're on the next slide, Ross, thank you so much. I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves. Hi, Valerie. Oh, EECS. We've got an EECS teacher in the house. Ross, you start. Introduce yourself, your school, your grade.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ross Berman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a computer science teacher at MS 217 in Queens. Happy to be here.
Christy, that's you.
Sorry for the toddler in the background. I'm Christy Jones. I teach at the High School of Hospitality Management in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, and I teach AP-CSP for juniors and seniors.
Eliane, that's you.
Hi, my name is Delia Morales. I teach at the PSIS 95, the Gravesend School. I am a computer science STEM teacher for K-8 students.
Good morning. I'm Ashley Euphrat. I am a K-5 teacher. This year I'm in second grade dual language in District 17, Brooklyn Science and Arts Academy, and I am excited for the session.
Hi, all. I'm Taya Williams. I'm in a fourth grade ICT classroom this year. I'm at Brooklyn Arbor Elementary in District 14, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and also super pumped. Woo woo!
And I am Gwen White Best, and I am an elementary school library media specialist at the Dr. Ronald E. McNair School in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, and I teach 3K through 5th grade.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gwen. So we can go to the next slide. And just take a minute to let that quote soak in. When we really started expanding our educational equity and CS work, this is what we heard. And unfortunately, the Wall Street Journal was there to cover it all. We started talking equity, and there were teachers in tears, and maybe one or two who walked out. But I want to learn computer science. I'm not here for political mumbo jumbo. Folks weren't understanding the connection, some between culturally responsive and sustaining education and computer science, and who's in their class, if they stay in their class, and how that possibly affects what goes on in the tech world. So this article was really motivation for us to think about how to differentiate our training for educators and school leaders, no matter where they were in their equity journey. That was August of 2019. It was painful. And a few of the teachers here, like Gwen and Taya, were there on that very hot and absolutely crazy day. But now, fast forward, right? Fast forward after the death of George Floyd. You can go to the next slide, Ross, and see how different our lives really are. Starting with a professor, Yolanda Celia Ruiz in Columbia, and our friends at NYC Men Teach, we were really able to dig in what could possibly move our access numbers about which historically excluded kids, girls, brown and black students were participating in CS4All in NYC. So today, things are a lot different, as you can see here. Equity is infused in the curriculum, in the resources, certainly in things like conferences like this, We have a series of events with everybody from Joy Bulamwini to Ruha Benjamin to take critical analysis of the industry, professional development with the superstars you see here below, many of who are teaching our courses. Things like this Ingenuity Team, these are these folks, but we've gone on to build several social justice lesson plans, which you can find on our website. Can you have access to the slides? We're going to tell you no. But if you go to cs4all.nyc/equity, you can find almost everything that we're talking about today. Even things like a workbook to help teachers journal what's going on with the oppression in their schools in terms of CS. But we'll move forward. You don't need to know about all those events and all those schools, about 45, and all those boroughs who are hitting equity work, because I tried to drop it really quickly there. But I will tell you our crown jewel is something called Exploring Equity in Computer Science. That is a program that goes for an intensive summer where teachers are really looking at their own biases. They're doing the inner work that most professionals don't get to do. Then the second year, I said a second year, they get to apply their learnings to the classroom and expand it. We start with racial literacy, but the second year, there's a whole lot more topics. And by the third year, we're going for institutional change, for policy and practice, because otherwise it would be just talk. So EECS, that multi-part workshop series, they grow in racial, gender, and sexual literacy. They develop and apply their understanding of universal design for learning, and they infuse the languages. They move to and learn about infusing the languages of the students they teach into CS activities and lessons. And in fact, if Lauren is here, she's one of those people from Pila CS that has helped us with translanguaging that can talk about the work. I suggest you message her. But what you should know, that course, EECS, one of our favorites, we can go to the next slide, Ross. It was sort of born out of that really painful August 2019 when we were talking about what's going on with culturally responsive ed, and not everybody was ready for it. So there was a call to a cognitive behavioral therapist. What do we need to do? This is what we're thinking of doing. So Dr. Lloyd Talley, Dr. Sarah Vogel, Dr. Chris Holdley from Pila CS, Dr. Maya Israel, our queen of everything UDL, and Meg Ray, where I call them the Justice League. So we thought about how could we push these different topics into classrooms. Folks like the PLCS team had been talking about translanguaging in CS for a very long time. And of course, so did Maya. So it was awesome that they could share their talents with our teachers. But today we can go to the next slide. That Justice League has expanded, has mushroomed into quite a few folks. Everyone from our friend Meg Bowen, a CSTA Equity Fellow, to talk about sexual orientation, to Dr. Nicole Howard, who's just joining us to talk about data activism. Paul Gorski, of course, Yolanda Celia Ruiz, Wendy Morales, Michael Lachney, Chester Ray Warren. I could go on and on, but we realize we don't know it all. We know that so many of you are in the same boat as us. How can you possibly be an expert in all these different areas of equity? So we're pretty humble enough to call upon friends that can work with us, with some teachers who are incredibly brave. So Ross, we can just go to the next site. And we want to just point out before we move on in the conversation, we're not just talking about, hey, let's get some posters up and talk about identity. That is a beautiful place to start. Multiculturalism is really important, but anyone who's doing deep equity work, after a while, after a few years, it's certainly time to move on to how can we take action and how can we bust oppression in computer science. Otherwise, it's all talk, we said. But so what these teachers look at is, if we give these teachers access data, which is about to happen, so that we know exactly what historically excluded group has CS and who does not have CS in their classrooms, they're looking at, this is a multi-layered problem? Is it ideological oppression? Is it just the ideas that we have about who belongs in CS? Is it middle-class white boys that belong in CS? Is it just these ideas that are haunting our school? Is it an institutional problem? Do we per se have policies that won't allow certain children in CS classes? Or for instance, if I have a child who has an IEP, does that child ever get CS? Because when someone pushes in or should be pushing in to help the child is actually pulled out. That child never gets CS class. So where have we set up institutional policies? Whether it was an intentional policy or not, what's the impact of who actually gets to sit in a CS class? Is it an interpersonal problem between the teacher's own biases coming out on that child and affecting that child? Or is it something that's internalized, where the child has been so stressed by these ideological notions that they don't belong in computer science, that the child may be having a very difficult time in class? But those levels of oppression we're applying to every single topic that we study in equity. And what I really love, we can go to the next slide, is having these people here, because I know what most people don't expect is that these folks in equity are studying all these levels of oppression. So I'm really excited to have them talk about what was good, what was bad, what was ugly, and what we still need to work on in EECS. Ross, you can go to the next one, but how about let's just start with that. What's the most difficult thing about your work in EECS and the race-based affinity groups that we have? Does anybody want to start?
I can start with this one. So in terms of the most difficult part for me, I'm kind of a check done mentality, and this is not check done kind of work. So it's ongoing, and it's like every day, week, month, it gets better, but it's a long haul. So for me, I didn't realize like the personal reflection that I needed to do at first. When you go into level 1, it's all this personal like growth and reflecting on your own identity and even like what you were taught in your history classes growing up until that point. So I like always considered myself to be like kind of woke and like knew what was going on with the world. And it was a hard and fast reality of here's how it really is. So for me, I had to like drop the ego and really jump in and say, okay, I'm going to move with this. Once I allowed for that, I think lessons started to happen. But I remember at the end of level 1, I met with Christy and tried to explain like, here's an idea that I have. And Christy was like, no, that's not going to work. And I mean, and not to knock anything that like Christy's amazing and supportive and all of that, but it was just not what it needed to be. And I had never really thought, you know, I mean, I'm in year 19 of teaching. And when I started this, I was like 17 years in. So to hear someone be like, nah, that's not that good, was a little bit of a wake-up call to me. And then I kind of approached things differently and I got better. It was not golden at first. And whatever I did that first summer, I'm probably not doing exactly as is now. So I think that was really difficult for me to just adapt to the fact that this is different kind of work. And I need to push myself in ways that I haven't been before, which was really rewarding. But in terms of the affinity groups, I think Taya can speak more on that, the race-based affinity groups.
Hi, everybody. I also want to piggyback on what Chrissy said about difficulties. So in our PLS work, we learned about like your stance as an educator and shifts in your mindset and your practice. And something that's tricky is that it's not like this cookie cutter curriculum where you find something and it works and it's good and you put it in a box and then you use it every year. Like you're constantly thinking about yourself, about your students, and the changing nuance, and your shift is constantly changing every time you read another book or you have another conversation in your affinity group. You're like, how do I tweak this? How can I change this? So that you're being responsive, so that culturally responsive, you're actually being responsive in every conversation, interaction, and in the design of your instructional materials and your practice. So that is something that's tricky. It's never done. I think Chrissy spoke to that. You're constantly shifting your mindset and your actions. And so just like settling with that and understanding like that is the work can be tricky, wrapping your mind around that. But this is just the new normal. Affinity groups are amazing. It is a place where you can self-identify with those who share your perspective and ethnicity and lens in looking out on the world and what those daily interactions look like, and specifically with the context of computer science. It's a place to have support because sometimes being yourself in the world can be tricky. And so you can reach out and have that emotional and psychological support and have a group that understands where you're coming from things in the world and can maybe share those experiences. It's also a place to draw on ideas and get inspiration, so you don't feel like you have to face these challenges alone, but that you can maybe get a resource or a tip or have a thought partner where you can work those things out in partnership and collaboration. So it's really been an invaluable experience, and I think that it should exist in every institution, organization, every school. It's a necessary thing if we're really going to move this work forward.
So good point. Rewarding parts. Are we missing anything else? And I'm really curious how you would describe to other people how it's affected your teaching and your kids. Is it clear yet?
Well, I can speak on that in regards to how it's rewarding. I mean, it ties back to the students and how they are able to have this sense of empowerment. And it always touches towards piggybacking off what we said with the first question. How do we break our own biases and our own standards and our practices in teaching to really let our students' best truly shine? And for me, being in this program and shifting with EECS and starting at a school in the Bronx when I started CS4All with us, I saw a lot of students truly benefited from this. It was rewarding to have a lot of the glass ceilings break with the stigmas of thinking that students with disabilities or students with ENL or multilingual language students couldn't excel at CS, that it's only for those gifted and talented kids or certain demographics, and that, you know, that minorities couldn't really get into this. And to be able to learn these skills and these type of concepts and then apply it for our students, that I had was that one of my students that was that is autistic and didn't really excel in the core 4 of academics shined so beautifully in utilizing Scratch and showing who they are, representing their culture and everything in a small Scratch project that blew away the ideas of other educators at my school. It made them think to themselves, wow, like we need to stop stereotyping. We need to stop thinking that only, you know, academics can be excelled through just the certain basic standards, and that a test score is truly, you know, the denominating factor of what represents the student. I believe highly that with EECS and the practices that we as educators went through, it really shifts our thinking with teaching and, like, you know, outside of those cookie cutter type of curriculums. And it doesn't, and the beauty of it all with CS4All and with EECS is that students start to see themselves. They start to see the representation of themselves. They start to have this confidence that they're able to break these barriers and to have their culture and their practice and just who they are represented in a field that for quite some time was only a particular demographic. So it does affect not only, you know, the teachers that are teaching it like myself, but the students that are able to see themselves through these practices. And it takes, you know, more than just these educators on call. It takes everyone to be hands on deck with this. And it really shifts my practices as a teacher as far as thinking to myself that, you know, computer science is not a standalone. It can be integrated. It can be something so beautiful that can occur in all schools. So now jumping and switching shifts from one school in the Bronx. Like I took this work with me, and now I'm at a new school in Brooklyn, and I'm starting off small to do these same type of practices. And it's rewarding to hear the students being excited about coming into the CS class and getting into this type of work. So that's definitely the best part. It always goes back to the students, no matter what.
Anything surprising or like, oh my God, we really have to do this, or what does this have to do with what's happening in the room, in the classroom?
Well, I keep getting it unmuted. Is that good?
I'm hearing you. Keep trying.
It keeps on putting me on mute. Oh, I'm going. It so why my mic keeps on going mute, but I was so surprised by I had for the first time. It's still staying on.
Ashley, can you refresh your page?
Hold on.
And it's okay, I can just add a quick story before Ashley comes back. In terms of rewarding and effective teaching and surprising. So from what I learned in EECS at my school, we were trying to implement new mastery-based grading. And my school put out a communicate rubric. And it said, this is how we're grading students based on communicate. And I talked to my students about it. And I don't recommend doing this necessarily in your class, but I basically did a lesson with my students on how my school is wrong with this policy that they're doing. But my students talked about how, no, this is not how we communicate. This is not being responsive to us and our beliefs and our lives. And it led to where my students were actually able to lead a professional development for our instructional support team. And they led a session for my principal, our assistant principals, model teachers, PCTs, someone from Central DOE was actually there as well. And they went up there and they did a lesson for all of us on no, this is how we communicate, this is how we should be graded. This is our lives. And, thinking about rewarding and surprising, I will never forget one of my students after they did this session. I said to them, how do you think it went? And my student looked at me and said, I feel like I got my point across. And I just think that was such a powerful moment that I will never forget.
I think, this is awesome. These are the highs, but you guys have been in this for 3 years. And some of you've been doing it all along. Maybe we just didn't have the fancy academic language to talk about it. But what happens for someone who's on the call and they're just starting their equity journey? Any advice?
So I'll speak on that. So at my school, I'm the librarian, but I also teach computer science. I'm part of a software engineering program. So I wear 2 hats. So it's important that I work with the students with the literacy books and also do the computer science. So it started for us. So there's some of us who were originally here maybe about 3-4 years ago, can't remember the numbers, but we started with this book, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And we really looked at Zaretta Hammond's work. And we extracted this book. We actually stayed on this book for about a year, just really looking at her practices and how she embedded certain culturally responsive teaching practices. And we took that and adapted that for us. So I would say for a teacher who is just starting, really read some books. I think that's the best way to kind of introduce yourself to this practice, culturally responsive practice. So that is one of the books. And then another book that we use, I think started about 2 years ago, a year ago, was Golden Muhammad's Cultivating Genius. That book was amazing. It really talks about her framework. It talks about what we need to do as teachers to embed into our practices. So it talks about identity, skill, intellect, and criticality, and how we should be embedding that into our lesson plan. So I would tell a new teacher, read a couple of books by these great, amazing people, and then little by little, just start incorporating those practices into your practices. As a librarian, what I did to kind of shake up my library is I purchased books that looked like the students in my school. So I redid my whole collection last year. I bought maybe about 75 titles of books that represented my students. So it crossed the gamut. So some of the titles are Bright Brown Baby. Some of the titles are Franny's Father is a Feminist, Muslim Girls Rise, Hidden Figures, Not Quite Snow White. And all these books kind of talk about these underrepresented communities. It talks about people who they can look up to. It talks about activism, social justice, diversity, women empowerment. So I would say for a new teacher, maybe get some books in your classroom that either you can read to your students that kind of open up the doors for them, but also, maybe get some books. If you have older students, have that collection in your classroom so that they can look at those books and read those books and start kind of getting a context of how they belong in those books and those stories. I would also say get a co-conspirator. Get someone in your building or someone that that's going to do this work with you. Because when I first started, listen, I was a lone person in my building. I didn't have anybody really to connect to. This group that I'm with now is like family to me. But I did get people on board slowly but surely. And that co-conspirator is that person that's going to, check you when you need to be checked. That co-conspirator is going to support you when you need to be supported. That co-conspirator is going to keep pushing you when you're tired doing the work and you feel like you're doing it all by yourself and, nobody's listening to you or your admins are giving you a hard time. And that co-conspirator is the one that said, listen, we can get this done. We can do this. I got your back. So definitely find somebody who is a support for you. I also would say have lots and lots of images, quotes, pictures, so that students are constantly seeing these amazing people, reading these amazing quotes, understanding that they are in this, that they can make change. Our equity site has a lot of great lesson plans. So I'm going to big up Taya and Ashley and Ross and Delianne and Christy, because the lessons are there. So if you're like, oh my God, how am I going to start this? What lesson? We have created, along with other teachers, amazing lessons at every grade level. Because I support elementary school. I always say start with those little ones. So I start with my little ones. I read them those books. They may not do the computer science right away, but I start with those books. And then my first, second, third graders on up, we embed what we've learned into a computer science activity or project. Great beginning CS sites might be, I love CS First because it has a video. It talks about, how to do this coding. And what I also like is that the people who are in the videos look like my students, right? So they look like Black and brown people. And I like for them to see that these are people who are doing this CS work. So I would definitely start with Scratch Junior, and CS First, and create just little small projects, animated name when you're talking about identity and things like that. So for me as a librarian, that's how I would just kind of suggest you get, that up and rolling. But there are classroom teachers here, so they want to jump in and add how you can, as a new teacher, start equity. Please, jump right in and add on.
I would want to add on to that, Gwen, and I completely agree with everything you said. Actually, it goes hand in hand with what I was going to share for what was most surprising to me, because you just can't be afraid to jump in. You don't have to be the expert. Don't expect to be the expert. Your students will blow you away, and they are not too young. Like when I started this work, I was a first grade teacher, and I learned from my students. I just gave them the space to have the conversations that most adults weren't having with them, they were just having around them sometimes. And it really is, it just blew me away how much they had to share and how much they already knew about what was going on that other people were saying they were too young for. But I also want to add that one of the things most surprising to me as I joined in this equity group right after Sub Junior, I had just learned this whole year of everything I could about computer science and was ready to start trying it. I loved having this group to support me through it. And then I realized, wait, I'm supposed to incorporate CS, and now I'm supposed to incorporate equity too. And I was just a little scared. I was like, I can barely find time for CS. I don't know what they think, like what magical like time powers we must have. And the more I learned, the more I realized that equity and CS can't be two separate things. Like they really go hand in hand. And the more we make it explicit, the more likely it is that things in the field will change, because we can't expect students to just figure out that we're teaching them CS because we really want them to consider these fields. They need to understand that representation is important and it's not happening. And without them and them changing the direction of that for our future, it's not going to just happen on its own. So I really think that the more I learn about it, the more CS courses need to be explicit about equity and include that as part of the whole course, the professional development. Understand that when we're asking, especially elementary school teachers, which are already teaching so many things, to try it, to integrate CS, we know it seems daunting, but it's going to help so much. And it's also going to just make everything in the classroom come together. Those connections are so important and they aren't always there. But when you really include computer science, computational thinking, and equity into the conversation, those connections just happen. And that's how I started feeling more comfortable with it. At first, it was so hard to think of, like, where should I incorporate this? Like, where does it fit in? And now I don't see anywhere that it doesn't fit in. Time is still always going to be an issue, and that's something you just get better at, but it always connects, and it's just finding those connections, and the students can help.
But go on ahead. I see you, Taya. Talk about, you're already there, suggestions for administrators, policymakers, universities, whether we're talking about pre-service or in-service.
So I know it's a popular thing to slap on a label and say, we're doing CS. But if we're really going to do this work, we need to have real conversations, look at the curriculum. If you look at the trend internationally or big best practice around the world, you will see that the focus is on depth rather than breadth of, all this curriculum that we need to cover. And so if we are going to do this CS equity work, it's not a squeeze in last minute. It's not a 10 minutes at the end of the day or a code.org unit in June at the end of the year. It's infusing this throughout the entire year and starting in September with our students, integrating it into all the subjects we're teaching. And so that means taking a really good hard look at the curriculum and asking what is important and what is going to be responsive to our students' needs, meeting them where they are at and giving them what they need and making the real change. It means looking at the schedule and having real conversations with teachers about where this is going to fit in the school day, the school week, the school year. It's giving it the same weight as all of the other subject areas, because as we know, it is as important as all the subject areas. And I know Ashley, she's like a master of integration, has shared with me that real data about when you integrate computer science with ELA or with other subject areas, that you see improvements in student engagement, thinking, problem solving across all those other subject areas. So I know we keep having these conversations where the core is more important, and then CS kind of comes after that or underneath that. But the truth of the matter is, if we engage kids in this type of thinking and learning, and knowing themselves and understanding society and all the things at play, that informs their performance and ability to think and solve problems across all areas. And it will show on state test scores, on their performance assessments in other subject areas. It is all connected. So let's walk the walk and not just talk the talk.
But maybe let's talk about, Taya, you said breadth and depth a couple of times. So I feel like what we're starting to see now is everybody and their mother has an equity program. Someone just approached us last week where they were coming from a big industry, a big org, and they had a 3-hour equity program, and they were very excited to roll it out. So maybe you talk to people about the timetable that's expected when doing this work, the timetable of the stuff that you've gone through. And I think timetable helps you figure out what's the real deal and what's just something that companies are using as a marketing ploy.
So I think this also, like timetable stuff, goes back to co-conspirators. When you're thinking about your school as a space for change and change in CS, are you doing it alone, or are you doing it with partners next to you? If you're doing it alone, and that's how I started my journey, it took years. And I'm only 7 years into CS even being at my school, and still we only have 2 courses. Not everybody takes it. So there's all these challenges that you're kind of facing. I think when you get those co-conspirators and you start to share things with a larger community, change starts to happen, but it is a slow practice. And it also depends on your admin, right? Like it depends on what pushback you may have, and how engaged they are in this work themselves. And if they're not, how are you showing it to them? How are you elevator pitching or bringing them into your classroom and bringing other people that are maybe above them even into your classroom? I know Gwen is like the queen of having everybody from the district or the city come in and look at the beautiful work that she's doing. But that's how we convince people, right? Like, so there sometimes needs to be that as part of your process. How do I convince them that this is important work? And then start to make the changes. And my administration isn't great with like creative thinking and new ideas and change at large. So I have to approach them in ways that I know is going to be successfully accepted, right? Like, and everybody has that certain little niche in their school. But you have to find the spaces and keep pushing. And when one door closes, you have to find the back, entrance and the side gate and the window and figure out what your other routes are, because obviously this is not something that we're ever going to give up on. So I think that that's a really critical part. The timetable is going to look different for everybody. It's not going to be the same. And we just keep doing the work.
Yeah, and I see Joy's comment. Yeah, I mean, Joy, there are things like we are just getting ready to launch a course with the CS4All's staffer, Madison Allen, just decolonizing CS, realizing the colonization that is in computer science. Let's be really honest about that. So stay tuned. Those courses kick off, I think, as early as December 6th, right? And the other thing we're doing is Women of Color Digital Archive. Our friend Wendy Morales with the PLSCS team. You know what? Sometimes we just want to, as Diane Levitt would talk about, is just focus on joy, 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 joy. Like maybe you're 13 and you're not ready to overthrow the world yet. Maybe you just want to like chill and laugh and look at your TikTok page. So in that session, what Wendy will do is she'll invite teachers with kids and your Titi or your Bubby, your grandma, whoever, your Nana, but they will actually code together and they'll talk about their history, their maternal history, and put up beautiful images and see themselves reflected. And they'll use code to do it, right? It should be an absolute joyful thing. But that will launch in October or November. It is open. You can certainly come to that. But I think the thing that we've learned here is that the work, we thank goodness that CS4All NYC, the Fund for Public Schools, gets it. Not everybody gets it, that it's ongoing work. It's not one session, it's not a cute year, it is forever. So it really, and that means all of us. So all of us are in, even though the folks in front of you, they said, yes, I've completed EECS, they're in affinity sessions. There is no end time. Affinity is forever. So there are some days where I'm like, woohoo, I'm so up on my racial literacy. And the next day where I know my sexual orientation literacy, to be frank, just sucks. Or I know that, you know what, my dis/ability with a capital A literacy is in the toilet and I need a little help here. But we're talking about a 400-year-old problem, a systemic problem, and with images that are constantly coming at all of us. It's impossible not to move backwards. So it's so helpful to have a team of teachers, experienced veteran teachers who realize, hey, I have to stay in the work, I have to stick with this partner and to let the community grow. But yeah, someone else, jump in here. What else are we missing today? Like last couple of words, we only have 4 minutes, but last things to say. Yeah.
Piggyback on what you said. You don't know what you don't know until you join in the conversation. I thought I was informed. I read and do so much research, and every single session I've left with something new, something I couldn't believe I didn't know already or have never heard about. So you really just have to join the conversation to see what's happening out there that you may not know about.
Yeah,
Do
we
I
can.
have, I'm
Go,
sorry,
go,
do I
Gwen.
have a chance to say, oh, okay. I just wanted to also add on, because I work with the whole entire population in my building, for me, it's also important to make parents aware of what I'm doing, right? Because their children are going to be coming home with conversations, we read this book about, or, Miss White told us a story about, or we're working on this project, like Taya and Ashley did the Crown Act, an amazing lesson. I think it was Taya Ashley, and they did a lesson about the Crown Act and loving their hair. And we had a lot of conversations around hair and hair discrimination. And we really went deep on that. And there was a little, pushback here and there with that lesson. So sometimes, you need to make sure your parents are on board, whether it be writing a letter to them, hey, we're going to learn about this, or here's some things that we're going to talk about, just to make them know that, that they're a part of this also. And we're not teaching their children something that is like taboo or something that's bad. It's something that they need to know about, especially with those social justice issues and things that are coming up, talking about George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, all that stuff. And parents need to know that that is things that those are things that their children need to know about. So, just bringing in that parent piece is important as well.
How about your questions? I think we can open up the chat. Is there something that we didn't touch upon, or something that you want to share with us, something that we can steal? We would love to know it. While we're mulling, because I'm missing things in the chat, but I think Diane brought it up in the last session. Talk about the scary stuff, whether it was administrator who might not have understood how deep your work was going, and when you had to talk truth to power. I say that because I often get texts from Ross Berman while he's like, wait, are you there? Or is Dr. Talley there? I have to figure out this talking point, because he's about to go to battle with an administrator on something that needs to be done for CS. I've had several conversations with several of these folks. Talk about that stuff. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so I'll say, you know, I think, you know, when ECS level 3, we talk about, you know, changing policies and practices. And I think that's something that's definitely stuck in my head of, you know, making sure, you know, just because we've always done things a certain way doesn't mean they're right. And, you know, whether it's, you know, having CS4All simply as a program, like, you know, I think it took me 5 years and we were, you know, 90% close to CS4All at my school, but I keep pushing, talking to my administration every single year to try to get that done. But what I would say is, like, you know, different administrators, they'd have their different things. And I think just talking to them in what they care about. So for example, if it's my arts assistant principal, you know, she schedules the arts program. So I talked to her about how could we schedule CS4All, whether it's my assistant principal who talks about the communicate rubric, you know, I really focus on equity and SEL and trying to get the students to speak with her. I think one big thing, a suggestion for administrators, policymakers, universities is, you know, don't forget to talk to the students. There are so many meetings, you know, it makes me insane. My administrators, I hope, you know, I hope none of them hear this, but it makes me insane that they have a meeting twice a week where they just lock themselves in a room and talk to each other for like 3 hours, you know, or even an instructional support team that I'm on, where it's teachers and admin. It's just a bunch of adults in a room talking about what they can do for students. And it's like, you know, I think I hear a lot of people say like, oh, how do I know how to help all my like talk to the students, you know, like it's just, I think that's a really important thing for administrators, policymakers, universities, but also teachers to do, you know, just talk to those students. They have the answers. The answers are always in the student.
Hold on. Do we see, is our queen Diane Levitt in there? I thought I saw her for a minute.
Your queen. I mean, let's not get over. But this has been really fun to listen to, and I actually just wanted to say thank you to everybody because, you know, as a white woman of extreme privilege in this space, and also a person who was hired for a computer science education job without a shred of computer science experience or, and just an early childhood degree, I'm just a cat herder. I have found this community to be so incredibly generous in helping me get to the place where I can be helpful and be a, you know, a moderately impactful ally. So I really wanted to say that's, I think, a hallmark of this community. And it's not this way nationally, but I have definitely found it that way in New York State and New York City. Just so generous, so kind, so helpful, and so patient. So yeah, so grateful.
And I think it's Joy, you had that comment in the chat. So how do I say this? We're really nice. We are incredibly nice to people that we adore, people that we respect. It's not that many, equity wise, but we can be. It's worth it sometimes to shut some people out. And sometimes even an org has to be shut out. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the work is long and the work is hard. And what we've noticed is there are lots of ask. And sometimes they ask for just for money. They're quite superficial, or sometimes folks are looking to copy the work for personal gain, and then the depth is not there. And then it puts a very negative light on the real work that you see the folks in front of you doing. I think having a sense of discernment, because you will not be able to do it all. None of us are able to do it all. We rely so much on each other to finish each other's sentences, to finish group work, to constantly go over curriculum and slides and dig and push about who's the next hot author, or rereading that author for the 5th time, or going through it, or actually videotaping what's going on in the classroom to see who we called on, who we did not, how much wait time we give them, or being honest about the policies that we haven't pushed forth and they're taking too long to make it happen. But we are never going to convince everybody, and not everybody is going to understand the depth needed. And I think I got a talking to from Bettina Love about this is a 400-year-old problem. This is not going to be solved overnight. So within your, what's, yeah, I agree, Gwen, what's possible, you do. But we know we love the National Equity Project, and they talk about not being a hero. Like, we just don't have the time or the energy to be heroes, but we can definitely be host for people that are open to the work. And if I was you, Joy, I would start something like an affinity group, a book club, with folks who are ready for it. Because otherwise you could be destroyed in the process and just not worth it. It is exhausting. Agreed. Yeah, and Gwen said safe spaces. It's so huge. Affinity is often a safe space, but the other thing that we've noticed is sometimes we don't affinity. I think folks come in thinking that it's safe, that I won't be embarrassed. But the other thing we do is we know that other people are at very, very different equity levels and really don't want anybody to sit through my learning. So we're protecting others so that they don't have to repeat something that's so redundant and so silly for them. But yeah, so it's safe for the person participating and other people in the space who are like light years ahead and have a lived experience that we just couldn't think about. Last words, who's got them?
I was just thinking about safe spaces. And when I started this process, I was very much like an avoider of conflict in general, right? But specifically, if someone were to bring up kind of a racially heated topic, I would shy away from it. And I realized in EECS that this was like kind of like what I did as a default, because I didn't want to unsettle things and I didn't want people to be uncomfortable. And I've learned, obviously, through that process that it is that discomfort that gets us the growth and gets us to the other place. So it is very bumpy and it feels uncomfortable oftentimes. But I think that it's, that is a critical component. So when we're trying to upheave groups of people or organizations or curriculum or whatever it is, that there are going to be people who are on that team and people who oppose it, and it's okay for there to be opposition at first. It's natural and it's going to happen. And then I think once we realize that that's part of it, it becomes a little less scary. At least to me, it did.
And I want to add on to what Christy said about like that uncomfortableness. Like, so some of my titles in my book and in my library are titles that I ordered them, and originally I wasn't sure if I was going to actually read them because I'm like, I don't know how people are going to take this. So like one of the hot books that was out, and I think someone spoke about it, one of the senators, was Anti-Racist Baby. And I was like, okay, should I even read this to my students? Are they going to understand it? So I did read it to my fifth graders. I wasn't quite there yet with the little ones, but I did read it to my fifth graders. But that's because we had already talked about some of those things prior to the book. And I just love that they're creating these books and breaking it down for the little ones. And I love that. Oh, look at that, do the work. I love it. I love it. I love when you can pop a book in the screen. So those are my last words.
Anyone else? Thanks, everybody. This was awesome. But honestly, go to that site. It's like, do they really check it? Yeah, there's a form, and we're really checking, and we're trying to build up our list. So we have a community, again, of co-conspirators, not some like allies. Don't need any more of those. We got lots of friends, but people who will put bodies in the way when we're in danger. So you know what? We say thanks, everybody. Look. Empowering underrepresented students in science, STEM students speak. By, oh my God, Sanji Johnson Anderson. Full disclosure, this is my sister. That's awesome. She and her students, we love that. Students speak about these affinity groups and safe spaces. So awesome. All right, everybody. I say we take one closing picture and we get out of here. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Bye, good people. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you at the closing.
Bye.